I'm Dane Rose, and in the information age, the management, the regulation of the consumption and use of information is among the single most important talents for anyone to master. Now, in the parable of faulty success, the story goes that a person sets out to climb a ladder, and upon climbing each rung of the ladder of success, realizes it's leaning against the wrong tree. And so perhaps the single most important discernment or talent is picking the arena of media to consume, and then the most valuable media within that arena. So if we're to use an analogy, if you're an average person, learning to split an atom with nuclear physics textbooks, knowing that you're never going to work in a nuclear power plant, is probably not the right arena. If you're married and going through a difficult spot in your marriage, then reading a book about crucial conversations, about compatibility, that will have the high likelihood of improving your marriage, is the right arena. And by right, we're not talking about moral in the sense of, some objective good and bad. We're talking about a direction of well-being. When science indicates that the quality and nature of one's relationships, statistically speaking, has a vast impact on personal well-being, it is right, meaning it's in alignment with the data, to pick that as an arena in which to study. And similarly, once you pick an arena, it makes sense then, having picked a good arena, to focus on an area of expertise, to look for where the competence is. And in this case, someone who has a good marriage and has good communication skills is important. Meaning, if you're reading the book and you're not understanding what the author is saying, then expecting them to be able to help you communicate with your spouse is not rational. And so that is perhaps the single most important area of regulation. Pick the right goal. Now, in order to pick the right goal, one needs to consume media. A book, a conversation, a workshop, a video, one needs to digest the information in a format that works for you. And that's perhaps the next place to go, which is studies show that some people digest media better through audio versions. Some people digest media better by speaking. So that's something that I've found, that if I really want to understand something, I have to talk about it. And that's why creating media is a good fit for me. Not because I understand it all, but because by the time I'm through talking about it, I understand more than I did before. Other people digest media better in written form, and other people digest information better by doing. They are kinetic learners. So don't give them a manual on how to fix a car. Give them a car engine to tinker around with, and they will learn more effectively with that method. So, number one, the topic is key. Number two, in order to know and understand the topic, one needs to explore media about well-being, because what we're looking for is the talent or skill of being able to select the information that is most likely to correlate with my personal well-being. And this stems back to the origin and definition of intelligence. Intelligence is a value judgment that relates to the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into sustainable well-being. If you consume vast amounts of time, money, and natural resources and make yourself and others very miserable in the process for a long period of time, you could be considered to be incredibly dumb, very low intelligence. If you take very little time, money, and natural resources and leverage that in such a way that you and those around you experience long bursts of sustainable improved well-being, you could be considered very highly intelligent. And so you need information, you need data in order to make that assessment. Now, you may not need written education or information. You may need observation. But that is the ultimate measure of intelligence. And so particularly for those of us in Western cultures, we use as a primary operating system language. A primary technology is language, words. And so written information, mathematical information, statistics are a good place to start. So you can look at, for example, Sonia Lyubomirsky's stumbling around and looking at happiness. It's rather bizarre that, thank goodness we give, a few researchers a few $1 million to study happiness. It's only the single most important topic in the history of the species and, for all human beings. But, we'll invest more money in changing the Apple user interface on 1 year's iPad than we will studying the entire species levels of happiness and well-being. And that is, of course, not very intelligent because it will create minor annoyance to have to use the new interface and adjust when you just got familiar with the last user interface. So spending billions of dollars to get there is, nothing to write home about. And just 10 or 20 million dollars put into the researchers' hands that are focusing on happiness and well-being could dramatically and sustainably increase the species' sustainable happiness, increase our intelligence. So, written text about statistics, who are the happiest people? How do they function? How do you define happiness? These are areas, worth investigating. Now, once you find the research that points you in the right direction to where you're going to keep learning, where you're going to look at data, what questions to ask, where to look, what books, etc. Then you're going to look at your format. Do you want more of a visual format, a more experiential format? Experiential formats might be more workshop or travel. Listening, of course, is going to be something like Audible. Then you've got, documentaries and online forums and things of that nature. And then you've got your own conversations and, and books. So knowing where to focus on and knowing how to learn and where to learn, where to focus on, And then finally finding your medium, the medium that allows you to enjoyably digest data in a way that you're going to take action, is going to filter out 99% of the data, of the information that you don't have time for. And that's really important, because in the information age, where there are 1 million lifetimes worth of data that could be consumed, the number of door stoppers in a certain hotel in India, someone's got that database, but is it really a priority? The statistics on chlorinated water of a country you're never going to visit, valuable for someone, but not for you. And so one of the most important things to learn then is the art of cutting away the data that is not going to lead to sustainable well-being. Now, I'm sitting in a chair, looking directly forward, thankfully moving my arms, but there is a tolerance in the brain, in the body, for consuming data in a certain format, in a certain manner. And that's another thing to evaluate. So you may be your optimal dose. And remember that all things are medicinal or toxic depending on the dose. When I was dating, certain people I wasn't compatible with, several of the women told me, they said, Dane, this one conversation is, I'm going to take a month to digest this. This is a really rich, packed conversation, and I need some time to think it through. And so, they'd reach out maybe a month later or so, and, that was a healthy dose. And, to have that same conversation several hours every day for those people would have been overwhelming, would have been toxic. For others, it's refreshingly intense. So dosage is in an ecological framework. So for a given person, for you, a given dose of information is going to be too little, just right, too much. At both extremes, you have the possibility of toxicity. Usually at a very high dosage, you have the most risk, of anything. A very high dosage of cocaine, a very high dosage of sugar, a very high dosage of sunlight. Once you get a few miles away from the sun's epicenter, you're burnt to a crisp. So too much of something is often more toxic than too little, but too little salt, too much water, too little water, too much salt, too little salt. We're in this balancing act where we're in relationship, we're in a relay with everything around us, and there's an intensity in the feedback loop. There's a concentration, and high concentrations of anything become toxic to a given system, to a given identity, to you, to me. And so knowing that dose is useful. And, if you look then at filtering, you may be at different stages of development as well. For someone who's scrambling to learn life skills at a young age, needing to, figure out how to drive a car, how to, talk to a spouse or potential mate, how to negotiate a contract with a landlord, etc. You want things that are actionable, meaning if you're not taking any action as a result of the media, of the information, it's not useful media because there's so much you need to perfect and polish and get better. And so, that is it actionable? Am I improving my life physically as a result of this data is a very good filter. Later, because what you're going to learn is a series of coping strategies that are better than nothing and are flawed. All protocols, all patterns, all systems are better than nothing relative to, they're better than nothing, and they're also flawed. And so there's an evolutionary process where, one system is better than the other, then another system is better than that, but most systems are better than nothing. You might start off eating with your hands, then make a fork out of a stick, then make a fork out of a nice ornate, piece of carved bone or something else, and you just keep iterating the system. Now, later in life, you may enjoy information more for its tone, more for its presence or resonance, because you don't need any more money. You're accomplished many of your life goals. You're enjoying reflection. So there's a natural migration from the prioritization of the masculine or yang. We're not talking male or female, but masculine or yang things, which are outward movement, which you've got to learn when you're leaving home, getting a job, and things of that nature, and learning to drive a car, to once you become masterful in what is yang, one moves to a higher level of sophistication, which is mastering the yin without giving up the yang, which means you're mastering the grace, the style with which you break up with someone. It's used to do it crudely and you just got on with life, and now you manage to break up with someone in a way that leaves a smile on both of your faces, that retains the best of the energy, that leaves you on good terms, etc. And so you're still breaking up with someone who is incompatible or who outgrows you or who you outgrow, but you're doing it with more flair, and it's a higher level of talent. I can run and beat the Olympic medal and run the 100-yard dash, but now I want to do it with a little bit more grace. I want to, get my body a little bit more toned. I want to enjoy the journey. So this movement from masculine to survive, to feel secure in survival, to a higher sense of aesthetic, is a natural evolutionary progression. And as that occurs, the shift moves from things like in the computer industry, raw power, just some box that was cheap, the operating system loaded up, some crappy version of Windows or something like that, and then you got it done. The screen was tacky, but you got it done. It was reliable, and it didn't crash, and that was really important. But later, Apple came along with intuitive icons, user interface. See, now we're dealing with style. We're dealing with the feminine. It's not just not going to crash. It looks cool. It is attractive. And that's a higher level of evolution. And it's more expensive. So someone in survival is less likely to pay. I mean, when Steve Jobs went off into Next, after being fired at Apple, to form the even better machine, he took that kind of feminine perfection to an extreme where, working years just to develop a monitor kickstand and, $10,000 computer that no one could, afford. But wouldn't it be wonderful if they could? And so there's an evolutionary trend from functionality to esoteric, to aesthetics, to grace. And so, as you consume information for grace, you get more of a sense of, wow, I don't really care what the performer or what the actor in that movie said. The style, the presence, the acting was so nice. And, it doesn't really matter whether I listen to a book on nuclear physics. I just enjoy the sound of this person's voice. I enjoy the energy, the enthusiasm with which so there's a movement from raw functionality, from the focus on the yang towards the yin, where the lyrics matter less than the quality of the voice, where the record sales are not as important as the poetry of the experience of producing the album. And that is an evolution of abundance. And so if you're in that category of information digesters, then picking people who, you see their face and you just light up. It's called joy in the presence. Someone's joy in the excellence of another human being, and just look at the quality, and there's so many people on YouTube where you just look at the amazing, just quality. Andrei Zik with his finance channel is kind of a good example of that. It's just magic tricks and editing and, warmth and all kinds of little special effects. So, that is something that in that later stage of development, having secured survival in the human hierarchy of needs and security of survival and love and belonging and self-esteem. Now there's a movement towards beauty, towards truth, towards, just quality. And that's a movement from the yang towards the yin in the evolutionary process of going back and forth between all polarities. Now, most of us, myself included, are working out yang things, are still trying to figure out, how do I do this? How do I create this thing? I've achieved thousands of goals, but I want to do this really big goal. How would I create that? Now I need to know what works. And so the information that teaches what works from people who are competent in that area. There's one more thing I would say, which is that in digesting information, there are 3 levels of development, 3 levels of maturity. And it's part of evolution's game. Evolution is a program that begins with childlike sympathy and the unconscious, unconditional acceptance of the status quo. A child, you give the infant child to a Japanese home, they'll start eating fish and tofu. You give that infant child to a British home, they'll eat burgers and mash or whatever. It's wherever a cult or culture exists, the children in that cult or culture unconditionally accept the language, the eating, the styles, the affectations, the biases of that cult. And that's called sympathy. You're copying what is unconditionally. Now, the next stage in development is the adolescent state of antipathy. Sympathy, yes. Antipathy, no. Yes and no. The adolescent is the state and stage of rejection, of criticism, of differentiation. That's the time when the child who wants to be like mom and dad says, fuck off, mom and dad. You're a hypocrite. Why did you do it like that? Oh, I hate that. That's so embarrassing. I don't want this. That's disgusting. And I'm ashamed of myself for going along with that. And I don't like this country. And I don't like, that's adolescence. It's antipathy. And the purpose of sympathy in the evolutionary makeup is to rapidly download the best that the cult has to offer to date. Why? Because that's better than nothing. You could just hand that child over to wolves or, whatever, and just no language, no communication, no civilization, no roads, just put a child out on a desert island. They wouldn't learn to talk or listen or anything like that. And they might die, they might not. But it's a much more elegant thing to just have them just download the status quo with no editing. Now, having lived the status quo, every child experiences trauma, suffering, unfairness, something that doesn't feel right. And by the time the adolescent has reason and analyzing talent, they know exactly how messed up their parents are and how messed up their teachers are. They see the hypocrisy of their church priest, seducing another, person and being told to tell the truth only to be slapped for telling the truth that the authority doesn't want to hear. And they totally get how crappy and fucked up every part of the cult, every part of the family is. And it's so fucked up that they know they'll be punished for talking about it. So they go silent, all this stuff. And the purpose of antipathy, of rejection, of differentiation is, first of all, to become an individual. Secondly, to iterate. Now, why is criticism, rejection, and antipathy essential for life, for iteration? It's essential because how can you improve something that in your eyes is perfect? A child looks at their parents as if they're gods. How can you deal with improving God when God is defined as perfect? You can't. In order for evolution, iteration to occur, you have to identify the flaw. You have to find the fault, and you've got to be able to put it into language because that's the technology of consciousness. You've got to criticize it. You've got to say, that Ford is not getting as good mileage as that Toyota. And the smog of burning more gas per mile is causing X degree of asthma and things. That's not good. That's fucked up. Ford needs to get its act together. My parents need to learn how to talk. My teachers need to learn what subjects are actually relevant to my future. My government needs to stop taxing the hell out of people and actually learn what makes its citizens happy and what they care about by, how about a census of well-being? And so you've got to criticize these things before you have the next stage, which is adulthood, and it's synthesis and synergy and iteration. Meaning there's no point in criticizing something and leaving it at that. You start off as a child, everything's wonderful. You move into adolescence, everything's fucked up, and you just stay there. Everything is fucked up, it's never going to change, and it's so fucked up that it's not even worth trying because it's so fucked up. Well, you've gone from childhood to adolescence, but that doesn't help evolution. That doesn't help life take us to the next level. What helps us move to the next level is iteration. What's a better idea that has fewer downsides, more upsides? We need that. Or we're stuck. We're stuck in reacting and rejecting, but we're not creating. And that's essential. That's essential to life's game. It's when the adult is born. It's when response, ability, power, freedom, authority, authorship. It's when the adolescent goes from complaining about how rotten the world is to making a better version of the world they are dissatisfied with, divine discontent. It is part of life's protocol to identify what's wrong so that it can be improved upon, not by blaming and complaining and throwing a tantrum. When are the grown-ups going to fix it? Why didn't my boss give me the perfect job? Why didn't my parents know? No, it's fixed by iterating. As an adult, I will respond. I will make it better. And this is my version. So we make it better. We have children, and our children spend a few years idolizing and accepting and fitting in with the status quo. Then they realize how full of shit we are, and reject it all, and the whole process of life continues. If they grow up, they do a better version of cult thinking, a better version of education, of intelligence than we did. Because otherwise, life is stagnant. Now, going back to media consumption, this ties in, this sympathy, antipathy, synthesis triangle is relevant to the psychological state, not the biological state. You can be 50 years old and still in sympathy, unable to see that there's anything wrong with your cult, unable to see if there's anything wrong with your abusive parents. You're stuck as a child. You can be an adolescent, bitter, cynical, and disgusted with all of it, and not getting that that's just step two, that the whole point of you understanding how fucked up things are is so that you have a chance to make a better mousetrap. And you can't make a better mousetrap until you know what's wrong with the old one. And so in media digestion, you can idolize new media, and there's a stage for that. In any new cult, in any new group, in any new relationship, you met the one, right? Your soulmate, and they're so perfect in this. Oh, it's just so amazing. And then you go into adolescence in the relationship. They're full of shit. They're hypocrite. They're so annoying. All this and this. That's wrong with them. That's wrong with them. That's wrong with them. They forgot to, it's been weeks and they forgot to wish me this thing they should have told me if they really loved me and all this stuff. You go into antipathy. Or you can be in synthesis. Now, if you're in childhood dynamics, you will give godhood to whoever you idolize at the moment, the Dalai Lama, the Pope, the president, your rock star. You're in childlike relationship, sympathy. Whatever they say, oh, it's just perfect. Whatever they do, they couldn't do anything wrong. So you're a child and in the childlike relationship. Now, next will come antipathy. If you're in the adolescent stage of learning to differentiate yourself and learn what's wrong and trying to move towards that adulthood, then you're going to find problems. The microphone, it's so crappy. I'm not listening to this. What does he know? He doesn't have a good microphone, That's so old-fashioned. Did you see his shoes? Oh my goodness, I'm not going to learn with, from such a dork. I'm going to find someone else and then there, so antipathy is the state where everything's wrong with everything. And that's a very necessary state. So you can consume media for the purpose of clearly identifying what's wrong with, oh my God, the so-and-so said this, but then they did this instead. They talk about environmentalism, but they flew in a jet plane to the environmental conference. Can you believe it? In fact, they all flew in, to Copenhagen, ate their plastic cups, because they couldn't be bothered to wash dishes. They drove taxis around discussing environmental summits. And the net effect, if they'd all just stayed home and stopped bothering everyone, it would have been a better, there'd be less CO2 in the atmosphere. And, what a bunch of bullshit. Now, this is adolescence. And so the purpose of adolescence is to, clearly delineate everything that's messed up with everything so that you have the possibility to move into adulthood. Now, an adult does not expect or feel entitled to perfection from anything. An adult is looking at, this is the status quo, here's what's fucked up about it, here's what's great about it, and here's what could be improved, and here's how I can improve it. Here's how I'm willing to improve it. I'm willing to contribute my talent here so that the fucked up status quo is a little less fucked up after I contribute my talent. I'm going to develop my talent so that I can contribute even more. Now, in the adultan synthesis state of information, the question is this useful to me bringing my gifts? This relates to Maslow's higher needs, the need to develop one's capacity and talent and create abundance in the world by bringing it out there. Will this information help me with that? And if it does, it doesn't matter what shoes are being worn. It doesn't matter how rich or poor, white or black or this. What matters is, I can use that piece to do something useful because I'm an adult. I'm not an entitled adolescent or a unconditionally blind and accepting child. I'm an adult. And we do not raise adults, so there's no shame in not being an adult. We do not initiate our young people into adulthood, and so many of us die in childlike states or in adolescent states of antipathy because nobody taught us what an adult was. And so in the media consumption process, you can use it to learn. And when you're in the presence of talent, competence, expertise, and you know very little, the godlike, put it all into me, deification stage is fine. Because even though the talented person is imperfect, is flawed, is, a hypocrite and all of that, you're still going to learn more if you show respect, if you look and look again to see, than if you do nothing. So there's nothing the childlike state is an efficient part of evolution, which is why every human being goes through it when they enter a new relationship or a new job or enter a new cult or culture. So if you're in the adolescent stage, use it to define what's wrong and why it's wrong. And then if you want to grow up, how it could be done better. And if you really want to be an adult, do it better. Focus on something you're willing to respond to and go do it. do the better school with the better salaries, with the this, with the that, and train teachers not to humiliate the children and and figure out why it's not happening right now. What's hard, because almost everyone can grasp how fucked up education or the prison system or the dealing with attorneys or whatever. We can all see this is not a very efficient system for creating happiness and well-being, but how do we do a better system? And where are we stuck? Maybe we can't articulate and no one wants to listen to us. So these are the guidelines for working with media. And if you're in antipathy, a good piece of media is someone you can criticize and compete with. Oh, that's full of I could have done that better. But don't just do that lazily. Show how you can do it better. Point out exactly what you can say and this and that and the other. So, that's useful. You're an adolescent. You're figuring out the flaws in the system so that you can be part of life's path to evolve it, to iterate it, to make something better. Not so you can be superior. That doesn't help life. You're a tiny part of life. And life's game is to keep making beauty, truth, goodness, sustainable well-being more and more graceful, more and more sophisticated, more and more diverse. Life's been doing that for 24 billion years, taking an energy field this big and just sympathy, antipathy, synthesis. Sympathy, antipathy, synthesis. And 24 billion years later and counting, with an eternity ahead, we've got billions of life-affirming planets that we're aware of. We've got the known universe, and perhaps a lot more. And we've got billions of different species, and all of this time and all of these billions of people, that's all come from this simple protocol: sympathy, antipathy, synthesis. So how do we take this into the basics? So we're going to look at how I work with this on Audible. So I like Audible because I tend to be more sedentary, meaning everything is toxic at some extreme. And so, if I will default to not moving enough and having long phone conversations or writing a book or reading stuff. And so what audio does is it allows me to go for a walk, to go out and do errands, to listen while I'm in the bathtub and, things like that. So, I just had a lovely bath, was listening to an Audible book. And so I like the format. And then I like to do a mixture of sympathy, antipathy, and synthesis. So the topics that I'm interested in are topics that I think could lead to something. So one of the things that I'm exploring, because it's a potent topic, is psychedelics as a scientific instrument of consciousness and of cultural evolution. So that's a possibility, and it becomes more probable if people learn the science. So I'm studying that. So hence, I haven't listened to this, but here's a book by Aldous Huxley. I enjoyed The Doors of Perception some years ago, so I think good writer. And he may or may not discuss psychedelics. I'm also exploring, the paradigms of good and evil, etc. I made a video recently. So anyway, I'm going to look into this. Now, the next step that I'll take is I'll click the listen in Audible and hear, would I enjoy listening to this narrator for 8, 10, 20 hours? Because if it's irritating to my particular filters and ears, then let's pick another book. Because that's the beauty of a deluge of information, is with far too many bits of useful information than one individual can digest, one can be picky. And so I want a good narration, I want a good author, I want a good subject. And here's another one I haven't looked at. This sounded interesting. Again, I haven't begun it. This is the one I just listened to in the bathtub. And I would say it's probably 30% subject matter, 30% writer style. It's taking things I've read in much longer books and condensing them, and it's an enjoyable read. And what I like to do is find things I can agree with, find things I can disagree with, and clarify why I disagree with it, and then try and clarify what I would do differently and why I would do differently, and measure that. And then if I can take one or two actions as a result of any piece of media that I digest, that is phenomenal. Particularly, that's my goal with any Audible book, is to take one or two actions that would dramatically improve my personal sustainable well-being. And what I'm enjoying and exploring with Oprah's book with Bruce Perry is the continuum between what we might call victimhood and personal responsibility as two potentially toxic polarities. So what happened to you is the narrative that correlates how childhood events affect people for the rest of their lives. And that's one pole in the truth. And the other pole is you are 100% responsible for your life. No ifs, ands, or buts, no excuses. And they didn't do it to you. You create your own reality. You're responsible for it all. Go for it. Now, these are two polarities. Now, that's the domain of the adult. Because you have sympathy, everything's perfect, antipathy, everything's fucked up, and then you create a unique combination. And so what I'm interested in is, since I have spent a lot of my life leaning towards the extreme of personal responsibility, creating your own reality, etc., and at times feeling frustrated, lonely, impotent, crazy, etc., because that's not my experience. My experience is other people do what they're going to do, and I respond the way that I can respond, and and so I've taken that to a toxic level at times, and then there's a medicinal level, and I've taken victimhood to a toxic level at times, and blame and self-pity, and it's all there, they did it to me, and that's the child state. And then I'm looking at, where is the sweet spot? So that's why I'm interested in this book. And I'm interested in the results. Like, I'm curious how many people reading this book with Oprah are taking constructive action, feeling more self-love, etc., because they understand the influence of past events and how that correlates with current day statistics. And how many people are getting lost in an endless pity party, that actually sidetracks them from the fact that while you may not be able to get rid of the herpes that were given to you by the person who raped you, you can take some vitamin E, take some lysine, manage your stress levels so you have fewer outbreaks, and enjoy other things, and so there's that there's that tension. And so that's what this book is about. I just started a self-directed solo 401k. So that's, I wanted to learn a few things about that. And that ties in with wanting to put a lot more money into investments than my IRA would allow, for tax-deferred growth. And that ties in with certain goals around wanting to make some major investments in app and community for my nonprofit. So that's, what this is about. And, I appreciated the subject. I criticized what I criticized about the delivery and the style. I took a few things that I could act on. And that's an ideal recipe for digesting media. Get clear on what you like once you've focused, etc. Notice what you criticize and understand it. Criticize in the sense of allowing me to get better rather than simply blaming and complaining. Like, how could I learn from that and do a better job? Because that's useful criticism. And I checked this out, didn't find it terribly useful, but 3 or 4 hours of it was enjoyable. I wasn't it didn't seem like I was going to take more out of it, so I just abandoned that, halfway through. And so I'm quite willing to let go of a piece of media. Enjoyed this story, questioned, whether it was fiction or not. And I really enjoyed this book because it dealt with the theme of forgiveness, with trauma, etc., which is a theme that I'm exploring. What's the difference between avoiding confronting an abuser out of terror and helplessness and being afraid of confrontation versus being willing to confront but willing to move on out of a generosity? That's a polarity. And I have things to learn in that terrain. And so I was interested mostly in the woman's story of how she navigated that terrain. And and as I hear someone talking about things that I can extrapolate and deal with in my own life, then I, will bring that up with my wife or someone else and say, well, what would you do? What if it was like this? And if this happened to you, how would you handle it? And this is how she handled it. Do you like the way she handled it or the way you would normally handle it better? Why? I liked this part, but I'm not sure about this. And so I would say that, that engagement to make it all personal, just to pretend I'm this character, I'm that character. Why would this character do this? To make it a learning experience is, for me, to talk it through the most important method of integrating it, learning it, making it not just, something to fall asleep to, but to remember and put together and to grow. So that about wraps it up for what I think is the most important talent in the information age: how, why, and in what areas to digest and utilize information. And I hope it serves you. I hope you take and sympathize with the bits that are well developed and work for you. I hope you constructively criticize what could be better and not just whine and complain, but take it then to the point where you say it better write it out. Write out an improved version that leaves life a little bit more beautiful, a little bit more intelligent than before you interacted with her in that one little piece of all that is. I'm Dane Rose, and thank you so much for enjoying and exploring this journey together.